Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the m-hance Dynamics Power Platform Hints and Tips webinar that we're going to be running today for the next 40 minutes or so. Just going to allow another maybe half minute for more attendees to join us, and then we get cracking. Okay. All right. Like I say, good morning, everybody. James, you don't mind? Next slide, please. My name is Daryl Brislane. All I'm doing here today is just to kind of introduce James. That's my only job, really. And a few things maybe at the end. I'm the business development manager here in Ireland. Joined today by James Glover, head of solutions architect. I think most of you will know James. And essentially, James is going to take you through hints and tips. We do this every so often. It's always good just to kind of see maybe some of the newer capabilities are coming into the solution via the various waves that come into Dynamics 365 released by Microsoft on a 6-monthly cycle, or cadence as they call it. But also just revisiting some of the capabilities in the solution that are there, but we always forget that they're there, and just a reminder that they are there, and some of them are bloody useful and can help save time in a lot of situations. So before I hand it over to James, I'll just go quickly through what he's going to kind of cover off in this session. So there's a few points there, just in terms of the user interface, really going back into some of the basics, some navigation aspects, some moving around the solution, how to get quickly from one area to another, things like that. Reporting, some of the things really going to cover are things that we might have forgotten about. Reporting in Grid, the reporting panel. It's there, it's always been there. I'm guilty of never using it, and then when I think about how to do something, I say, oh, the reporting panel, that does make sense. So just a reminder, the reporting panel is there, a reminder how to use it. We'll go into Power Automate, or workflow as it used to be called, but more around digging into Power Automate and optimizing flow jobs within Power Automate. So just helping to ensure that they're coded correctly, they're coded in an optimized fashion so that they're not slowing down the solution for other users. And then you'll finish off with some under the cover stuff, so environment performance, but just some of the metrics that you can actually track and access and view. Things going slow, what's going on, just some of the screens and information that is available to you on an ongoing basis, so that you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. So that's kind of the 4 core areas we'll be touching on today, or James will be touching on today. That's as much as I'll say about it. James, hand over to you.
Thanks, Daryl. So yeah, if you have any questions as we're going through today, please pop them in the question panel, and you can play with Daryl a bit, test his knowledge. And if you can't answer it, I'm sure he'll kind of interrupt me and we'll kind of cover it as we go. So we're going to start with just a couple of things in terms of user interface, playing with the data, just to kind of show aspects that people forget are there. Yeah. So let's start. We're going to go into Dynamics 365, normal elements, and just to cover it, because so many people forget it's there and the functionality is available to us, is just the recent and the pinned area. If you're doing lots and lots of work, it's really, really beneficial to use that pinned area and just kind of keep on top of things. So being able to go straight to a particular record is really powerful. So again, it's just helped being able to do that. Say, actually, I want to go here, I want to go there. That sort of aspect of knowing what's going on, the last 10 things you've done, and within here, I can then come and say, actually, I want to pin that. And it's just going to go down to that pinned area. So it speeds up your kind of workflow of using the system if you've always got to go to the same view every day, and especially if you've created a custom view on a custom table. Being able to pin that means you can just quickly get back to it really, really easily. The next thing I want to cover is just some of the keyboard shortcuts everybody forgets. So if I'm in a record here and I've changed maybe what should I change on here? Alternate email. At gmail.com. Let's just pop a second email address on. At this point, I could just use the keyboard to save that record. I don't need to navigate to the save button. I could just hit Control S. So using those keyboard shortcuts, kind of Control S, you can hit Escape to kind of, when you accidentally mess up a lookup field, it's worth Googling all the different keyboard shortcuts because they're all there. They're predominantly put there for accessibility features, but actually, if I'm in the middle of doing a record and I want to navigate away, I don't want to have to move my mouse all the way to the top of the record to click save, to then drive down to go into a different record. So again, using those keyboard shortcuts just makes that process a little bit easier. And the next thing is here. So I could be on a particular record. I could be looking at this organization, well, Ethel in this context here, and maybe I want to look at her household record, but actually I'm already in here and I don't want to lose where I am. Just remember little things. If you hold the control key down, standard Internet Explorer stuff, and click on the link, it will open a new tab with that record on it. So again, you can suddenly go bounce between them, you'll be comparing data. So anywhere on the internet, if you hold the control key down when you click on the link, it always opens another tab. And in the context of a CRM data, a cloud-delivered CRM database, being able to do that and say, actually, I also want to check that record, holding that control key down and just spinning up those extra tabs is kind of invaluable. There is ways we can do it. We also have a different user interface called the customer service, I can't remember the name of it now, which just gives you a tab within Dynamics, but normally just hold the control key down, open a couple of extra spare tabs is really, really powerful. It just means you're not having to think where are you going backwards and forwards within the browser. It kind of means you can kind of get to where you want to. And on the subject of that as well is always remember we've got the little back button here as well. So if I've been driving around the system, I can click this little arrow and get back to the record I was just on. So in here, it's kind of hidden away, and you can do that. And even in here, we've got open in new window as well. So I could be looking at this and maybe I could just have a pop-up window to open that record as well. So there's lots of ways you can kind of get to a point where you have lots of different bits of information so you can bounce between those records. So next thing I want to cover is just bits of navigation that we kind of forget exist. So if I go to my open opportunities view, so I can have a big list of opportunities in here that I want to kind of play with. And first off, so I could be in here and I could say, actually, I want to filter on status or maybe filter on the phase, that sort of aspects. But it's quite often a lot easier just to turn on the chart panel. So if I open the chart panel, I can then access all the charts that have been written in this system and just use it as a means of navigation. So maybe I want to look at all my opportunities as type qualified. I could just click on that pie and it's going to show me all my qualified opportunities. So it's really nice to be able to then potentially even drill through again. So I've now clicked on all my qualified opportunities, but maybe I want to look at, let's pick probability or something, another field on this grid. If I can spell. Probability, and I might want to do look at probability in a chart form. So then I could then go look at all my qualified ones and look by probability. So at this point, I've got all my opportunities by probability, and actually then I could drill in again and look, only my ones are at 60%. So I'm using the chart to draw another chart to find the data I'm interested in. So it just gives you another means of navigation. And because we're in the chart control at this point, we're actually dealing with up to 100,000 records if we wanted to, of slicing and dicing to get a much quicker way of getting a defined list. So it really helps in that sort of, actually, I want to do this, I want to do that. There's no questions so far. It's a Darryl. I haven't got two screens open today.
Oh, you've got them all stunned into silence.
Good. All right, so let's get back to opportunities. So in here, we've discussed how we can kind of filter using the chart control, other aspects like that. Just to cover some things that have changed in the last 6 months that are really useful. So I'm just going to have a look at here and get all of my open opportunities just so I've got a better list. So I just want to get a shorter list. And at this point, just things that are worth doing and considering is we now have a multi-form selector on our bulk edit control. In the old days, we used to have a editor that gave us this big ugly form look from CRM 2011. What we've realized is in certain contexts, as a systems administrator, what's actually really useful to do at this point is if you've got certain fields that need changing in bulk all the time that a user needs to do, there's nothing to stop you creating a special version of the form just for bulk editing with the fields you need access to, and only give certain people access to that form. So if you always want to approve like 50 records or 100 records, just create an approval form with just the right fields in the right place. And again, it just speeds up that workflow of how you're using that data. And it just helps in terms of quickly using and absorbing it, and also just making sure you're not going off on a complete tangent. Next thing I'd recommend as well, just throw in this topic, is, I don't know if I've got a view in this particular one, is we'll quite often create a view called the reporting view. And the reason we'll do that is that view could literally have 40 columns in. So if somebody wants to do a quick play in Excel, they haven't got to remember which columns to pick. So it's not a view you use all the time. Just stick it down the bottom, as called it reporting view. And then effectively you pick that, you get a really wide set, loads and loads of columns. So when you're then interacting with your Excel buttons at the top of the page, you're straight into a really good record set to quickly play in terms of bulk editing, looking at it, doing a quick pivot chart. So rather than the user having to do that, work out which columns to pick, just create a reporting view they can kind of just quickly go into and use and abuse with some of the other Office 365 tools. So it just helps in terms of how people are doing that level of interaction. And the next thing, again, around the Excel piece, is using it as a means of getting new data into the system. So I'm just going to go to, let me just find somewhere. I want to go to a particularly an easier table just for an example. So I'm going to go to my list of campaigns. These are the marketing campaigns I've got set up in my system. And in this view, I made sure I popped in enough columns so I could fill it in myself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come up here and do Open in Excel Online. And we're all used to the concept of kind of editing this and playing with some data and hitting save. But a lot of us forget that actually we could put a new record down the bottom. Spell 2022 race, and it could be an event. It's going to be on the 10th of the 10th. It could finish on the same day. It's only proposed. I can give it a marketing campaign. The 22. And at that point, if I hit save, that's going to create that record in the database. So if you've got an Excel sheet with maybe 50 rows that need to get into the database, just doing the Open in Excel will allow you to do that. So if I click track progress now, it would have automatically created it as an import job. My extra row, if we just hit refresh in a second, hopefully. So it will go through various elements. It will go from submitted to parsing, and in a second that row will be created. But if you just want to get data into the system and you don't want to kind of do all the rigmarole of creating a template, copying it all in, just do the Open in Excel Online. Gives you the same functionality, you know, transforming. It's not like watching paint dry, isn't it, watching this go through. There you go.
I got a question on that, actually. Do you mind opening that spreadsheet again, that edit spreadsheet? I'm just curious.
Just to prove it's not black, it's not dark magic.
Oh,
yeah. Where is it? London 2020 race. It's in the system. Yeah. So I'm just going to get back to you, Darryl. Okay, let me open that spreadsheet.
Can you let's just say, sake of argument, you got a simple scenario like where you've got first name, last name in the one column, and you wanted to have two separate columns. You know, it's in CRM, but you have two separate columns there where you want to take first name, last name, and split it out using a formula. So the field, in other words, you produce. You have the two.
I know exactly where you're coming from, and I've done that in the past, Darryl. I've actually created new columns, done all my funky formulas to get my values. Pasted the values back into the right columns, deleted.
Oh, you pasted, right? Very good. Yeah.
So do that. Literally, if you want to do some maths, do a bit of logic. Use standard Excel at this point. Do your logic, do your maths, do your funky if-else statements, and just paste it back into the column it needs to be in as text, and it will be submitted and go back into the database.
So, all right. Well, on that, we do have a question. Do you have to put all the required fields into the form to do that? Which I think you've just answered.
Yes, and again, back to this reporting view scenario. If you're going to do this, just create a slightly wider view with a whole bunch more columns in. Makes it easier for everybody.
Andrew, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's essentially, yeah, to ensure that the information is back into CRM, you would have to have that required field in that spreadsheet.
Yeah, so sometimes you can get away if it's going in by the SDK. It's not always required, but we can ideally we make sure those required fields are in there. But it just gives you another angle for getting that data into the database. Okay, next thing I wanted to show you on the lines of reporting, playing with data, is a tool that's very, very new, and this is part of the Wave 1 2020 release, but it does need turning on. But I thought I'd something we covered Wave 1, I think it was a couple of weeks ago on a webinar. Since that webinar, this functionalities came out, so I thought it's really worth explaining because it's great for people with lots of data that just quickly need to analyze what's going on. So again, I'm back in my opportunities view. I've got a list of opportunities, and throughout the whole of my pre-sale system, you might have spotted I've now got this visualize this view, and this is real-time dynamic creation of a Power BI report with a Power BI free license. So it's not like you're buying Power BI Pro for every user on your estate. This is somebody in real time just creating a report of what they see to see what it looks like. So let me put this into context. If I click visualize this view now, there's an AI model kicking in from Microsoft, looking at the view, looking at the columns, grabbing that data, and working out what it thinks you want to see. So there we go, it's just going to load up now. So it's doing a real time, so it's just pulling the data from the database. It's doing this, give it just 1 second, this is while the model kicks in. But again, what the nice thing with this is it's going straight past some of the charting limits, the field limits, because we're in the Power BI world now. So you're seeing here, it's looked at my data, looked at the columns, and it's decided maybe the style of report I want to look at. But at this point, because it knew what values I had in the columns, maybe I wanted to look by customer name instead. So I could just click on that one and say, actually, I really wanted to see my data in relation to the customers. So if I click on that, it's now going to think, actually, what type of report does James wants to see now? Let's just give it a second, and it's now broken it all down. It's looked by customer down the bottom right, it's looked at estimated income. It's just building those charts, and at any point we could modify those charts, change it. So it is literally real-time reporting, but it's also great as a terms of a data migration tool. So normally if you popped in 100,000 rows, you'd have to use a third-party tool then to work out what the data looks like. Here you can quickly dip into a high volume data set and just kind of get some rudimentary metrics of record counts, how we're doing, record count by this type, that type. So it's just a really quick way to visualize that data. Even down, if I wanted to, I could even go into the data table and it'll give me a data table of them all as well. So really nice in that context where I can play with it, everything's wired together, I can see what's going on. Maybe you want to look at only your closed ones, for example, and I can quickly drive through and play with it just like it's pure Power BI. So really nice way of just visualizing that data and playing with it. It is a thing you need to turn on. I could share the article later if anyone's interested, please get in touch. And it's going to be an option you can have very soon. It's on now, it's not even in preview, but to turn it on, you have to go to a really obscure place to find it. But I'll probably lose half the room if I try and show you how to navigate to turn it on today. All right, so we've done a lot on the UI, a lot on things we can do within the product to make life easier. Now, what I'd like to get onto now is some elements of governance around hints and tips around building flow jobs, building flow triggers, and kind of environment variables and that sort of aspect, if that's okay. So
before James, one question before you leave there from Marianne, I think it is the income summary household screen that you showed initially. You know, I think one of your early screens.
Yes.
Is it something that James has created for this demo, or is it something available to our NFP customers? I suspect
so,
that's definitely, look, is it?
Yeah, that's the fundraising engagement screen, Marianne. So we'd have to build something equivalent in a little Canvas app for you as a customer. Yeah, we could achieve it in a Canvas app. Okay, so what we're going to go to now is kind of Power Automate, flow, and some of the governance aspects around it. So, and again, a lot of it's to do with performance and also just not overly working the back-end environment. So I want to do some hints and tips around kind of Power Automate. So let me kind of go into a Power Automate job just so we can walk through some actions. And the first thing I want to walk through is how we get data and how we trigger data. Let me just change my Zoom profile on my screen just so people can see this a bit better. So what I want to cover is in Power Automate is if you start to embrace Power Automate, it's one of these tools that natively lets you be a little bit lazy. So the best way to describe this, if anybody's ever done any work in SQL over the years, you never do a select star from table because you're just getting a big amount of data that you don't really need. You do it occasionally to have a look, but you should never do it if you're actually building a proper piece of software. Power Automate, the way the connectors work, it's always the equivalent of a select star. So it's always grabbing absolutely everything just in case you need it. So in the context of maybe getting the contact record, for example, or getting an account record or some income data, those tables are very fat, wide tables. And what I mean by that is the contact table could have 700 fields on it. The account table could have 500 fields on it. The income table isn't running around 250 fields. They're very wide, chunky tables. So if you're pulling that data from the database, by definition, every row, it's going to be pulling in, the contacts example, 700 pieces of information. So if you're saying, get me 500 contacts, that's 500 times 700 of bits of data it's pulling back. So you end up with a flow job that's naturally slow and doesn't perform particularly well because it's always carrying around all this excess baggage that it doesn't really need. And that's where it's really critical to only get what you need. Yeah. So in this context here, as I grab my data, I'm telling it which columns I am interested in. And by doing a simple step like that, this has made this particular flow job, this is an example one, run 15 times quicker because it's got less data and less baggage as it's going through. The next thing is whether it's a trigger or whether it's a select, always implement a filter. Never grab and then check a value. Always filter it so you don't get that record in the first place. But it's no fault of anybody because when the first connectors came out, it wasn't particularly good at filtering. So when they first came out, it kind of said, oh, just give me what you want and then you can have a look. So by default, you were kind of going, don't want that, don't want that, don't want that. And you had a very bulky job that spent most of its time saying, actually, I'm not interested. Make sure we're implementing filtering and sort bys and that sort of stuff to make sure we only get the stuff that's explicitly we need. There's nothing worse than getting then checking because that means you've just wasted that data load. So it's just about thinking of the architecture when we're doing these aspects because it will really help in the performance. Okay, the next thing to consider is just going to go to a different flow job. Flows don't always have to be real time. Flows could be, they could wake up once an hour and just assess a series of records. So what's happening and what's coming down the pipeline with Microsoft in terms of Power Automate is they're going to start implementing better governance around how many flow jobs people are running and consuming. So if you've got a job waking up saying, has anything changed when a record's committed every time, you could end up running 200,000, 400,000 flow jobs a month but they're not really doing anything. So work out, does this need to happen automatically, or could we check records that have been edited in the last hour and only touch the ones that need touching? So one way to do that is define scheduled flow jobs. I think this probably failed last time I ran it. Let me just go into edit. So edit this one. Sorry, opening a flow is like watching paint dry, isn't it? So it will load up in a second.
Just while that's we're waiting for that, James, Jonathan asked, and going back to some of the visualization you showed earlier. Now I can't quite remember which one, but he said, are there other templates, or is that the only one that you have available by default?
As in the Power BI, I'd imagine it's around that content.
Yeah, the Power BI, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's using an AI model to work out what it wants to display. If you want to build, so it's very much a let me dip in and look at my data. Obviously, if you want to build a structured report, you should be on Power BI Pro, and we should be embedding it in as a dashboard. So there's very different use cases. One is I've got this report, it has to do this, this, and that. Then it should be a proper Power BI report in Power BI Pro and added as a dashboard. This new option is more a user wanting to dip in and look at that data set. Okay. So next thing is this. Don't do a flow that checks every single minute. If it doesn't need to happen, just set an hourly job or a nightly job. And the first thing we can do is we could get all the records that we edited that day. Because we've got better filtering now, because we've got better field selection now, there's nothing to stop us as part of a nightly job saying, give me every single income record that was added today that meets this criteria. Then when we're looking at our overall load on the system, we've gone, so imagine if you had 400 income lines a day coming in, rather than 400 jobs assessing something, if we didn't need to update it in real time, we could have one job once a night. So just think about that in terms of, does it really need to happen instantaneously, or could we just wake up and check? Because if we're waking up and checking, we're doing less load. It's easier to problem solve because you're only looking in one place, you're not looking at a big list of them. It just helps in that context. Okay. And then whilst we're in here talking about flow governance, the next thing that's came out probably 18 months ago, really got bedded in the last 6 months, and something I definitely recommend for the more advanced users is make sure we start using environment variables. So what I mean by that is, so I'll just pick any one of these. In here is what's referred to as an environment variable. And what we can do is, as part of our solution, we can actually build out environment variables with a default value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, do a new environment variable. And so imagine if you had like a third-party piece of software you were integrating to. Maybe you were talking to a GoDonate API or another website that you were asking it for data. Yeah. So let's just do GoDonate. God, I can't spell today. As an example, in here I could say it's a text value, and I could set it in here. So I've got my environment variable, but the really beautiful thing now is when I'm deploying it between environments, I could have one flow job and each environment could have different sets of configuration because it's a variable. So you could have like a different username, a different password, a different endpoint. So you've got the ability of knowing what you're talking to. You've also got the ability of creating like conditional environment variables with, if something's set to yes, don't run. So again, it gives you those options. But more importantly, again, we've only just got this very, very recently, is we can create environment variables now which use Azure Key Vault. So I'm sorry I'm going geeky on people, but effectively what this means is we can have a structured store of usernames and passwords for third-party services that are kept encrypted. Everybody in IT is happy, they're in a safe, secure place, and we pull them out of that secure locker when we want to talk to third-party software. And this is very new, because in the old days, if you were creating a custom integration to a custom website, you'd have to hold that username, have to hold that password inside of the flow, and it wasn't best practice. Now we've got that ability of having kind of a nice rigid structure where we've got all of our governance around password security, where they are and who's policing them. So it's worth having a read up on them if you've got any third-party integrations with some different platforms, because it makes it a far more scalable, encrypted method. Yeah, because what's happened is with all of these kind of magical automation platforms on the internet, they all started out with let's just grab all your usernames and passwords, it will be fine, let's stick them in the cloud. Now we've got back to the governance of how they're held, how they're secured. Yeah. So Zapier always fills me with dread. You see somebody logging in with their personal Gmail account, then putting their corporate credentials into a web page hosted in the US. IT have no visibility of it. This is kind of the governance end of the spectrum. So we've talked a lot about Power Automate Flow. What I want to do now is
one question, James. Sorry. So, is there an upper limit on the number of records that a scheduled job can handle? Previously, the questioner previously had ones that timed out around 3,000 records. Thereabouts.
And ridiculously, it probably timed out around 3,000 records because you weren't picking the number of fields you were retrieving. So there's an upper limit of 5,000, but there's also an upper payload limit of 100 megabytes. So if you were grabbing 3,000 records, 700 fields per record, you'd breach the payload of the flow, and it would time out or fail. Where if you're only interested in 5 fields, you'd go straight past that 3,000 because you wouldn't breach the upper payload of 100 megabytes.
So eliminate the fields you don't want from the scheduled job.
Yeah. So it's all around having that governance structure of what do you actually need to read, what do you actually need to see? Because again, 3,000 records, big fat wide record, it will be sluggish, it will be slow, it could time out. 3,000 with only grabbing 5 fields, it will be more performant, it will loop better. So it's just thinking about that kind of governance. Okay, and what we're going to do now is just go on to just how do we check in our environments that these things are behaving, these things are working. Yeah, so we're going to go into the admin center and just walk you through some of the new elements that are in here now that are really useful just to check how healthy our environments are. So for the first couple of years of the cloud environment, it was like a black box. You didn't know what was going on. Magical fairy dust was holding it all together. What we've been getting a lot more of now is the telemetry of what's really going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So in the analytics area now, in the admin center, if we're looking after users, if we're understanding what those users are doing on a daily basis, it gives us a much better indication of what's broken. So ironically, even now, I've accidentally opened a dashboard where I've had some failures. So I after this meeting, I need to look and see what's going on. But in my chart here, I've had everything working perfectly all month. And then today, I've got a black blob here of a bunch of flow jobs that have just stopped working. So you can start seeing that actually this telemetry is really, really useful. We can see what's going on. We can see actually there's our failure count, what's going on per month. And we can start looking for anomalies, start looking for spikes, because spikes either up or down could be a sign of a failure as well. It could be that the flow jobs has been turned off, or someone's imported masses of data and didn't tell you and then caused a big spike in the system. So being able to look at this telemetry against an environment and look at sensible numbers really helps us in terms of making sure what's going on behind the scenes. So if I went to usage, for example, let's let this just load up. So all of this is natively Power BI reports behind the scenes. I didn't want Power BI. There's a filter here. It loads up. It's never a good day, is it, when you get weird errors like that? Let me do the next one. Just going to refresh my page. It's just not. I left this open last night, and I think the browser's just forgetting where it is. No, ironically, I've got a mild platform issue just while we're talking. Let me do that. There we go. So in here, for example, under errors, I can see actually which flows are erroring. Yeah, so you can see now errors last 30 days. I can see I've got a problem with purchase invoice creation flow. I've got a problem with this because ironically, it looks like one of my colleagues was playing with the Eventbrite connector and just left it switched on and it went a bit AWOL. But looking at that gives you that telemetry because you wouldn't necessarily know it was broken. Yeah. So actually being able to come in here, see actually this is going on. Oh, someone's turned the job and they forgot to turn it off, or they've created an error. That's really powerful to kind of see what's going on behind the scenes. So it's more looking at the telemetry, understanding who's doing what, what's happening. That's the key thing. If we can kind of come in here and have a look at this and see how they're being run, are they scheduled, are they button clicks, out of the flows, which are the ones that are running the most, it gives us that idea of checking and preempting what could be wrong. And that's the key thing, is using these dashboards as a preemptive means of actually something funny is going on. Maybe I should dig deeper, because they should tell you where to start looking. And that's me on hints and tips for today, Darryl. So if I pop back to the PowerPoint, I didn't even use any of the slides, did I?
That's okay. Okay,
there we
yeah,
go.
hold it there, James. All right. So if there's any more questions, just if you wouldn't mind maybe put them into the question grid there, and we'll deal with them as they pop up. But just while I'm waiting for that, then just a few housekeeping items. I do realize that we have an audience here today that it's made up of both our charity customers and our non-charity customers. I'm just going to highlight to the charity customers some of the events that are coming up over the next few months. The first one there, the user group, it repeats a lot because that's a user group that's actually organized by our charity customers amongst themselves. They do invite us to participate in some of their user groups, but it is primarily a networking event, a help each other out type event, and it takes place monthly. And essentially all we do is kind of facilitate the team's meeting, but we don't participate unless we're invited. So it's a good opportunity to network, or maybe bitch about m-hance, but I'll leave that up to you. That's that's the user group. But what we do provide on a regular basis is a round table event. The last 2 years, of course, that's been a virtual event where every quarter we invite all our charity customers and provide updates on what Microsoft has provided, or updates on some of our NFP focused modules that we make available. So again, if you are a charity and you're not attending those roundtable events, they are available to all our charity customers. Please do join us on those events. We are hoping to have the next one in face, but it'll probably be both in face and online at the same time, so that those that are far away can still join in. But then more importantly, we get to start to attend events in person again. So James, if you don't mind, 3 events coming up that I just, again, for the charity customers, like to draw your attention to. In Dublin, the Wheel, some of the Irish customers will be familiar with the Wheel. They have their annual summit back on this year. It's taking place, I think it's June 1st out in Croke Park. And we will be there with the tables. Myself and James will be there. So look, great opportunity to come and understand what's going on in the charity sector. There will be an awful lot of speakers across the sector, government, other areas, and we will be in attendance. And then 2 events on June 30, both in London, so a bit of a clash, but we will be again attending both events, the Charity Digital event, where we will be speaking, and then a charity event focused on the finance users within charities, also taking place on the 30th of June. And again, we will be in attendance. We will be speaking with one of our customers. So just a few things over the next 3 months to be aware of, participate in, and again, network, learn, and so on. And then James. And that's that's really it for today, guys. Let me just do a quick check on questions. Anything more popped up? Yeah, the user group is not on the events page, actually. If you wouldn't mind just letting me know, for example, just our Jenny who sent out the emails for this event, and we can get you onto the user group invite list. So Colin, I see that came from you. I'll ensure that you get put onto that invite list, and anybody else that might be interested in the charity user group. And the last thing to say before I sign off is we will be, as soon as you sign off on this, a survey will go out to you. If you wouldn't mind responding to the survey anonymously or otherwise, but just the feedback is useful for us to kind of help hone these events and just make them more useful as we go forward. So just to say, thank you all very much for attending today. Last quick question. Let's just check in the questions, user group, just say thank you. No, that's it. Thank you all very much today.